You're one ugly motherfucker. The Predator is directed by Shane Black and is a continuation of the Predator franchise, which started back in 1987. It's fair to say that the Predator franchise has had its fair share of hits and misses over the years. The original still holds up incredibly well as it was directed by John McTiernan, who would later go on to do Die Hard. It's still a great action movie and it knows exactly what it is, and it's still a good movie. The sequels and the follow-ups, on the other hand, then they haven't been as great. Which is why I had every faith of this movie being brilliant. I mean, on paper, this movie should have been great. You have Shane Black directing this movie, and over the last couple of years, he's directed some fantastic movies like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, The Nice Guys, which was my favourite movie of 2016, and even Iron Man 3, which I don't care what anyone says, I really like that movie. So he's had a fair bit of experience in both the blockbuster side of things and the comedy aspect. And seeing that he's also in the original Predator, you would expect someone with experience in the franchise to, give it a bit of oomph, give the Predator franchise really what it needs right now. Unfortunately, the Predator doesn't do that. It instead kind of does the opposite and fails at almost every aspect. I honestly don't know what went wrong with this movie. And it still baffles me with how bad it actually turned out to be. Because the company and Shane Black pretty much had every single aspect that makes a Predator movie good served to them on a plate. So I don't quite get why the movie is as shit as it is. Before I really rip this movie a new one, I'm going to point out the two positives that I could find with this movie, and they're very minor ones at that. First of all, it had some fairly cool moments and some pretty creative deaths that were gory to say the least, and the Predator looks cool. That's it. Everything else about this movie is a mess. A great, big, fucking mess. By far, the biggest problem with this movie is its editing, as it constantly cuts from one scene to another with nothing connecting it in the middle. It's like going from point A to point C and someone forgot to add B. It constantly does this throughout the movie to the point where it just seems really confusing and actually kind of hard to follow if you're not paying attention. You kind of have to fill in the gaps that the editor forgot to add. What the other thing that this editing situation does to the movie is that because of it, it lacks the essential flow that is needed to tell a cohesive story in a movie like this, or any movie. Because you're missing those connecting scenes and moments, it just feels like a series of things happening rather than a story that flows properly. On top of all this, there are a lot of jokes in this movie, and I was kind of expecting that, seeing that it is written and directed by Shane Black, who is notorious for doing comedy movies. But there are just loads in this movie to the point where you could almost class it as a comedy, which is, again, not quite what I was expecting. I was just expecting a straight-up action movie with a few quips thrown in along the way. But here, they kind of focus more on the comedy than they do with the action, even though there is some action scattered throughout. But the main problem is none of the jokes are funny at all. I would say there's really one joke that made me laugh, and it's a joke that was in the trailers. Apart from that, every single joke falls flat on its face in this film. Nothing made me laugh at all, and there's a couple of running jokes in the movie that are actually kind of awkward and cringy when they happen, and are just not funny at all. Also, every single character in this movie is really forgettable, whereas in the original I can remember almost all of the characters' names. You got Dutch, Billy, Hawkins. I could go on and list the rest of the soldiers. But that's the thing. In the original, you have memorable, iconic characters that you want to survive and make it out of this situation because their roles are reversed by the time the movie is over. They start off as strong, masculine badasses who are in charge, but as soon as the Predator starts killing them off one by one, they suddenly become vulnerable and a bit more human, which is why you want them to survive, because they're not the people they were when the film started. Whereas in this one, all of the characters are either arseholes or happen to have a mental disorder for some reason. By the way, the whole inclusion of mental disorders in this movie feels really out of place. There are two major characters that have some form of a mental disorder. One guy has Tourette's, and there's a 12-year-old kid who has quite extreme autism. The Tourette's guy really doesn't make any sense. There is no reason for him to have Tourette's. It doesn't really provide any character development or push the story forward. He just has Tourette's, and all it really leads to is a recurring joke that, again, isn't funny. Whereas the kid, I can understand why his character has autism, as it kind of fits the story, and he is one of the main players to make the story progress. But apart from that, there is really no need for them to be in this movie or to have the conditions they have. If you're going to tackle those mental disorders in a film, have the movie revolve around that. Otherwise, it just feels really out of place in an action movie about an alien that kills people for sport. This movie also does a similar thing that another movie did a couple years ago. Back in 2016, a movie came out called Dad's Army, which was a remake/reboot of a classic British comedy show of the same name. And what that movie did is reused and tweaked some iconic quotes from the original show and tweaked them in a way that I suppose made it appeal to a younger, newer audience. But it really didn't work there, and it doesn't work in this movie, as it does the exact same thing. It takes iconic quotes from the original movie and alters them to a point where they lose all original meaning, and they're just kind of stupid. In the end, The Predator is probably one of the most disappointing movies of the year, up there with the likes of The Cloverfield Paradox. I really wanted this movie to be good, and it really should have been, really thinking about it. But in the end, we got a really crap movie that I'm just baffled by. I'm going to give The Predator a 5.5 out of 10. It might go lower in the future, I don't know. Like I said, the only redeeming aspects are some cool-ish moments, and that the Predator looks pretty cool. But that's it. So guys, that was my review of The Predator. I hope you enjoyed it, at least more than me trying to watch this film. If you did enjoy it, then give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Bye.